A secret recipe vanishes, and with it, its creator. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment below and share where you're tuning in from. I'd love to know. This community's voices make each story feel alive. Let's begin. If you want to get Nero Wolfe to twitch an eyebrow, you need to do one of three things. Insult Fritz's cooking, misquote Pliny the Elder, or enter the brownstone before noon uninvited while reeking of store-bought mayonnaise. The man who appeared in our front room that Thursday morning did all three. I was in the front hall, pretending to reorganize the umbrella stand, because Fritz had politely asked me to get out of the kitchen. His reason? He was whipping the emulsion, which is Fritz talk for making his sacred homemade mayonnaise, and apparently my presence was affecting the viscosity. So I was kneeling on the tile when the doorbell rang like it had a vendetta. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting me," said a voice that came with a face like a shiny stapler and the air of someone who hadn't waited for an invitation since 1992. His suit was white, his shoes were tan, and his breath smelled like disappointment and commercial egg product. I gave him the grin I save for tax collectors and people who call me Archibald. He's not, but I am. You've got 30 seconds to tell me your name and how it managed to crawl past Fritz's cooking. The man ignored me, which, as you may know, is never a great opening move in this house. He breezed past like he owned the woodwork and made a beeline for the office. "Mr. Wolfe," he called. I followed, slightly amused and mostly curious. Wolfe was in his chair, throne really, reading Dioscorides with the serene annoyance of a man forced to coexist with the 21st century. He didn't look up. "My name is Len Drower," the man said, planting himself in the red leather chair, without waiting to be asked. "I own Drower Foods. We make condiments, mayo, mustard, pickle relishes, that whole world." "Remove yourself," Wolfe said, still not glancing up. "Excuse me? You entered my home without an appointment, authorization, or basic hygiene. I am not interested in mayonnaise or any of its industrial bastardizations. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe." The guy leaned forward, elbows planted. "I didn't come to sell you anything. I came because someone stole from me something important." That earned him a flick of the eye. Just one, like a lizard sizing up a bug. "You have 12 seconds, Wolfe said, "before I summon Mr. Goodwin's shoulder." I cleared my throat for effect and flexed what I hoped was a menacing deltoid. Len Drower held up a flash drive. "This contains the original manuscript for a new marketing campaign, written by a guy we hired from the literary world, a novelist, no less. It's not just ad copy, it's smart, emotional. We call it the Mayonnaise Manifesto. It tells a story about family and food and betrayal. The thing is practically art." Wolfe sighed as if forced to consider a second-rate Bordeaux. "It was on my desk yesterday. This morning it was gone. No one broke in. No alarms tripped. I believe one of my senior staff took it." "Why?" Wolfe asked. Not how, not who. Why? Always the first lever he pulled. Because they want credit. Or they want to sell it to our competitors. Or maybe they're just jealous that a condiment company could do something actually literary. Wolfe closed Dioscorides with a whisper of ancient paper. "I dislike theft. It is clumsy. But I dislike literary affectation more. I have no interest in narratives about eggs and oil." Drower didn't blink. "Then consider this, the writer. His name is Garrett Latham. He's missing. And so is the backup of the manuscript he gave to my secretary, which was kept in our internal system. That's 2 vanishings in 1 day." Saw Wolfe's shoulders still. Not tense, but still. The kind of still that meant something under the surface was being rearranged. I spoke. "Mr. Drower, if you're telling me a marketing guru wrote a mayonnaise novel, and now both he and his eggy masterpiece have disappeared without a trace, you're going to need to offer more than intrigue to keep Wolfe from banishing you to condiment purgatory." Drower looked at me, then back at Wolfe. 50,000 plus expenses, and I'll keep the press out of it. I raised an eyebrow. Wolfe did not. "Why come to me?" he asked. "Because you have a reputation for discretion and results. And also because someone I trust said you care about ideas. And this manuscript isn't just words, well, the writer told me it was a confession, a hidden message." Now Wolfe moved. Just a fraction. He leaned back, fingers tented. A confession to what? He didn't say. Just that I'd know when I read it. And now it's gone, along with him. There was a long pause. Wolfe's gaze drifted toward the window, where the sunlight tried to sneak into his carefully temperature-regulated world. Then he turned to me. "Archie, get the names of everyone who had access to that manuscript, and inquire about this Garrett Latham, his work, his affiliations, and the last place he was seen. We will determine if the matter is worthy of our attention. Lenny." Drower grinned like a man who thinks he just sold a ketchup packet to a steakhouse. He stood, smoothed his suit, and extended a hand Wolfe did not take. "I'll have my assistant send over the personnel list and background on Garrett. So you will do no such thing. You will return to your factory. I will summon you if we proceed. Mr. Goodwin will be in touch." Drower nodded and left, trailing the scent of synthetic garlic and ambition. I waited until I heard the front door. "Close." "So," I said, "are we solving the case of the missing Mayo manuscript?" Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Possibly, but only if Mr. Latham proves to be a man worth finding. And if this so-called confession leads to something more palatable than public relations." "Understood," I said, "but you have to admit it's not every day Mayonnaise shows up with a mystery." "Pfui," Wolfe said, but he didn't open his book again. By noon I had a decent idea of what kind of guy writes a Mayonnaise manifesto and then vanishes before lunch. Garrett Latham, age 38, had the kind of face that made book jackets feel intellectual and approachable at the same time. Clean jawline, slightly unruly hair, and an expression that suggested he was always on the verge of saying something. Profound or just smug. He'd published 3 novels. The first one did pretty well, the second got shortlisted for something European. The third vanished as completely as he had. I'd just finished scanning the digital clippings Saul had dropped. In my inbox when Fritz poked his head into the office and said, "Mr. Goodwin, a parcel arrived by hand. No return address." The man who brought it declined to wait. Wolfe looked up from his chair. "Bring it." Fritz returned with a small square package wrapped in brown butcher paper and sealed with enough tape to mummify a small mammal. Wolfe sniffed once, which, for him, was practically a bloodhound act, and gestured for me to handle the opening. Inside was a half-empty jar of mayonnaise. Not Drower's brand. This one was glass, hand-labeled in black marker. Latham No. 2, Basil Wolfe arched an eyebrow. "He made his own." "Looks that way," I said. "And someone thought we'd be interested in his second recipe, assuming. There's a first and a third. There was also a note, folded once, no envelope, typed, printed, no signature. The ingredients are always the same. It's what's missing that matters." Wolfe muttered something low in Latin and stared at the jar like it had insulted orchids. That was enough of a nudge for me to start making calls. By the time the afternoon sun started nosing toward the west, I was back from a trip to Drower. Foods HQ with more than a few notes and a mild craving for egg salad. Len Drower's office was everything you'd expect from a man whose personality had been professionally bottled. High ceilings, low couches, and enough abstract wall art to qualify as a government-subsidized museum. I didn't see him, but I did get a guided tour courtesy of his executive assistant, a tall brunette named Marla Kemp, who had cheekbones sharp enough to slice celery and a voice that had clearly delivered more than a few press statements in there. "It's time." We were all excited about Garrett's work, she told me. It was strange, bold, a little indulgent maybe, but he was brilliant. He thought mayonnaise could be emotional. "That sounds almost tragic," I said. She didn't smile. Garrett believed food was memory. That taste could unlock feelings. His campaign was less about products and more about personal truth. He used to say every flavor was a fingerprint. I thanked her, jotted it down, and asked who might have had access to the manuscript. She gave me 5 names. First was Harris, Glenn, head of digital strategy. Bald, bespectacled, and allergic to eye contact. He didn't like Garrett, that much was clear. Guy didn't respect the format, he said. Didn't understand metrics. You can't just throw metaphors at condiments and expect conversions. Second, Lila Stern, brand manager. Late 30s, ex-PR, heavy eyeliner, light attitude. I adored him, she said. But he was off. The last few weeks he was paranoid. He wouldn't use the office printer. He started carrying a lockbox. Told me he was embedding something in the manuscript. Like a code. She shrugged. Or a confession. The third was Nelson Dreer, a numbers guy with a tie knotted too tight and a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Said he didn't read Garrett's stuff. Didn't care about marketing fluff. Writers don't move product, shelf space does, end of story. Fourth, Carmen Bell, head of packaging. She was quiet, mid-40s, with hands that looked like they remembered painting before spreadsheets got in the way. She just said, Garrett was too clever for his own good. And finally there was the writer's editor of record, Lionel Pritch, freelance copy chief and semi-retired ad man. He wasn't on staff, but Marla included him anyway. She said he and Garrett had worked closely on revisions. I tried Lionel at home that evening. His phone rang twice, then disconnected. When I called again, it rang endlessly without voicemail. I flagged it for Wolfe. Back in the office, I gave Wolfe the rundown. He listened in silence, as always, with his eyes half-lidded like a cat dreaming about neutralizing rodents. When I finished, he said, Miss Kemp? Polished, I said. Didn't blink when I said Latham might have vanished voluntarily, but she kept calling the manuscript a campaign, not a story. I think that's important. It is, Wolfe agreed. It denotes a narrative with intent, not expression. She believes it contains a message. And you said Latham used a lockbox? Yup. Lila said he brought it to the office last week. Kept the only physical copy in it, along with notes. Said it was safer that way. Yet it disappeared. I nodded, and no one saw him leave. He walked out Tuesday afternoon, I said. Told the receptionist he had a meeting uptown. Never came back. Didn't take his laptop, phone, or jacket. Weather that day was cold and wet. Deliberate. Then, Wolfe murmured, I could see the corners starting to fit together for him, but he wasn't ready to start gluing yet. Instead, he turned toward the mayonnaise jar still sitting on his desk. The jar was opened, the seal broken, Fritz confirmed, and said the texture was disturbed. Wolfe winced. A message, clearly. But intended for whom? The question hung there for a minute. Then Fritz reappeared with another visitor card. This time he looked annoyed. Mr. Wolfe, Miss Stern is here. She says it's urgent. She would not be deterred. Wolfe sighed. Bring her. Lila Stern entered like a summer storm in heels. Same eyeliner, same perfume, same sense of curated chaos. But this time she looked shaken. In her hand she held a folded piece of paper. This was slipped under. My apartment door an hour ago, she said. No name, just this. Wolfe gestured. She handed it to me. I unfolded it. One line typed, You've already tasted the lie, but not the secret. Wolfe's lips pressed together like a man biting. Down on the pit of a bad peach. I'm not crazy, am I? Lila asked. He left these. He wanted someone to figure it out. No, Miss Stern, Wolfe said. You are not crazy. But Mr. Latham may very well be dead. She blanched. I met Wolfe's gaze. Should I check with Saul? He nodded once. Find Latham, he said. Now. And just like that, the case stopped being about condiments and started being about disappearance, deception, and whatever truth Garrett Latham had stirred into the mayonnaise. If there's one thing Saul Panzer can do better than anyone in New York, it's disappear in the right direction. By dinner time, He was already 2 steps into Garrett Latham's shadows, following his trail with the kind of surgical calm that made the rest of us look like we were dancing in clown shoes. While Saul started digging, I paid another visit to the Drower Foods campus. This time I didn't bother asking permission. I caught Harris Glenn just as he was heading out with a reusable lunch sack and an expression that looked even more annoyed than the first time we met. "This again?" he said. "I told you. I didn't read the damn thing." Maybe not, but someone did, and someone made sure no one else could. I matched his pace down the sidewalk. "Tell me something, Harris. If Garrett Latham wanted to hide something in a Mayonnaise campaign, something real, personal, what do you think?" "It'd be?" "I think," he said, stopping short, "you should stop wasting time on theory and look at the numbers. You want a motive. Ask who stood to lose if the campaign changed directions. Ask who was being edged out." He got into his car without another word. I jotted it down. Motives by subtraction. Sometimes the simplest algebra is the deadliest. Back at the brownstone, Fritz served up deviled eggs with caper aioli, and I tried not to draw lines between the snack and the case. Wolfe, of course, was already several layers deeper, chewing. Slowly, eyes half closed. "Saul?" he asked without preamble as I settled in with my report. He followed Latham to a bookstore in Brooklyn Monday afternoon. Independent place, low foot traffic. Owner said Latham came in with a duffel bag and asked for something from the locked case. First edition, The Poisoner's Handbook. Paid cash, left a few minutes later. Alone. Significance. Could be symbolic. Could be nothing. Saul also checked Latham's apartment. Building manager hadn't seen him since Tuesday. Mail piling up, landlord's nervous, but no foul play obvious from outside. Keys. Changed the locks 3 months ago, didn't tell anyone. Wolfe grunted. Any sign of the lockbox? Gone. He pushed his plate away. Archie. Contact the bookstore. Ask them to hold surveillance footage. If it exists, get a copy. Already in progress. He nodded once, then added, Bring Miss Kemp here. I raised an eyebrow. Any reason? Because she knows more than she said, and because her calm is brittle. Half an hour later, Marla Kemp was sitting in the red chair, knees crossed, expression perfectly composed except for one tell, her thumbs tapping a silent rhythm against each other. Wolfe noticed too, naturally. "Miss Kemp," he began, "you brought Mr. Latham into your company. Why?" "He pitched us," she said, "at a dinner 2 months ago. Len was impressed, but I was the one who followed up." "Why you?" She tilted her head. "Because I could tell he was serious. He didn't want to write ads. He wanted to change the way we see food. He thought it could be personal again." Wolfe laced his fingers. "Did he speak to you of secrets?" She hesitated. "Not directly. But?" "There was a moment," she said carefully. "Last week. He told me he was finalizing the manuscript, and that once it was printed, someone in the office would recognize what he'd done. That it would either end well or badly." Define badly. He didn't say foy. Useless ambiguity. Wolfe scowled. "Do you know of any past criminal involvement, scandal, or personal vendetta associated with Mr. Latham?" She looked genuinely offended. "No, he was odd, yes, intense, but he wasn't dangerous. He may be dead." That landed. Her face stiffened and the tapping stopped. "I don't believe that." "You believe he vanished of his own accord?" "I think he knew he was in danger. I think he left breadcrumbs." She pulled something from her purse, another typed note, folded twice. "No envelope." She handed it to me. "Mayonnaise's memory. Taste it, and you'll see what was stolen." Wolfe exhaled. "This is not marketing. It is not narrative. It is compulsion. Someone, possibly Mr. Latham, believed this campaign was a vehicle for truth." Marla stood. "You think he was blackmailing someone?" "I think," Wolfe said, "someone feared exposure." She left soon after, shaken but grateful. I escorted her out. then returned to find Wolfe pacing. That, for him, meant moving 3 feet to the left and then back again. "You suspect her?" I asked. "No," he replied. "She is too worried to be guilty, but she's too smart not to have noticed more than she said." "You think it's about Drower?" "I think someone inside that company has more than condiments to hide." The phone rang then, Saul's voice sharp, efficient. "Archie. Update Wolfe." Latham's name popped in an old employment database. 5 years ago he freelanced under a pseudonym for a legal publication, investigative journalism stuff. His real name wasn't listed, but I matched the address. Topic: whistleblowing in corporate food safety. He interviewed someone at Drower Foods about mislabeling ingredients, never published. Why not? Company denied it, source went silent, editor shelved it. I passed the phone to Wolfe. He listened, nodded twice, then hung up. "This is not about a manuscript," he said. "It is about resurrection. Mr. Latham intended to exhume a truth that had been buried. And someone reburied it," I added. "Possibly with him." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Fritz reappeared, one of those appearances that suggested something more than food. "Mr. Goodwin." The downstairs phone. Mr. Lionel Pritch." I moved fast. Lionel Pritch had been missing from our radar. Now he wanted to talk. I picked up the line. "Mr. Pritch, Archie Goodwin. I've been trying to reach you." His voice was raspy, like someone had been trying to erase him with sandpaper. "I can't talk long. I'm at a payphone. I don't know who's listening." "Understood. Where have you been?" "In the wind, since Tuesday. Garrett told me someone was watching him. He sent me a copy of the manuscript, but not the whole thing, just the intro. The real ending he kept in that damn lockbox." "Do you still have what he sent?" "Yes. I'll get it to you. But listen, this wasn't fiction, it was his confession. And someone else's crime." "What crime?" "I think he was poisoned." Silence on the line. I read the intro again, he whispered. He described the taste, bitter, metallic, hidden in something familiar. He was trying to tell me, click, dead air. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. "That was our editor. He's scared. He thinks Latham was poisoned." Wolfe shut his eyes. "Get the mayonnaise jar to a lab. Have it tested for adulterants, anything out of the ordinary. On it, and find Lionel Pritch. Now." The manuscript had become something else, a message from a man who knew he was dying. And Wolfe, in his chair, immobile but mighty, had just begun to listen. The next morning started with eggs, Fritz's classic soft scrambled, dusted with tarragon, and a phone call from a toxicologist in Queens who owed me a favor from a case involving moldy mushrooms and a violinist with an overdeveloped sense of smell. "This isn't your average grocery aisle jar," she said. "That mayo sample you sent? It's emulsified fine, a bit loose in the protein bond, but the kicker is this. Trace levels of aconitine, very small, sublethal, but it's there." "Aconitine," I repeated, holding the phone a little tighter. "As in monk's hood." "That's right. It's not something you'd get from bad eggs or botched basil. Someone added it, deliberately, slowly, over time." "Would it build up?" "Not exactly. But it'd mess with your nervous system. Tingling, weakness, nausea, confusion. Taken over days or weeks, it might feel like stress or indigestion, until one day you collapse and the coroner scratches his head." I thanked her, hung up, and gave Wolfe the news. He closed his eyes for a long moment. "Archie," he said, "Garrett Latham was dying, and he knew it. So he put it in the manuscript," I said. "His symptoms, the taste, the clue. He knew the mayonnaise was poisoned." Wolfe didn't respond. He didn't need to. We were past marketing now. Past ego, ambition, and quirky writers with culinary pretensions. This was murder, or a dry run at it. The doorbell rang before noon, An event that in this house earns the same welcome as a power outage or a tax audit. I opened it to find Lionel Pritch himself, thinner than expected, greyer than his voice suggested, and holding a brown envelope with both hands like it contained either salvation or dynamite. "I brought what I have," he said. "I won't stay long." He didn't sit even when Wolfe gestured. Instead, he stood near the windows, peering out like someone half expecting a sniper on 35th Street. "I went underground after Garrett disappeared," he said. "He warned. Meat told me he thought someone had tampered with his food. He couldn't prove it. He said he felt watched." "Watched by whom?" Wolfe asked. "Drower," Pritch said. "But not Len. Someone under him. He suspected one of the senior staff." I took the envelope, inside 12 pages, typed, single-spaced, dense with metaphor. The first 5 were harmless, almost lyrical. A meditation on mayonnaise as memory, food as confession. But page 6 changed tone. It started describing the bitterness beneath the basil and a tremor in the hand that stirs the spoon. It mentioned a shadow watching from the glass office, and the pain of betrayal you can't name because it tastes like everything you've ever loved. Subtle. Too subtle for court. But Wolfe's eyes narrowed on every line. "He's naming the killer," Wolfe said. "Not directly, but he's pointing." I flipped to the end. No sign-off, no date. Just one final line. "You'll find me where the flavor ends." That stopped both of us. "Cryptic enough for you?" I said. "Deliberately," Wolfe murmured. The man was a writer, and he suspected that whoever read his words would not want them seen. Pritch cleared his throat. "He told me once that food campaigns were just modern fairy tales. He said if he died, the story would outlive him, that it would speak for him." Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "Mr. Pritch, we will need your cooperation. You must remain reachable." "I will, but discreetly." He nodded once and slipped out without finishing his coffee. Wolfe stared at the pages, expression unreadable. "Archie," he said finally, "bring them all. Drower, his inner circle. Here." "All of them?" "Yes. We require pressure. The right question at the wrong moment may provide the only honest answer." I called. Drower objected naturally until I mentioned Latham's health, the lab results, and Wolfe's opinion of unconsecrated mayonnaise. He agreed, reluctantly. By 4, the front room was full of power suits and crossed arms. Len Drower sat stiffly near the fireplace. Lila Stern perched on the edge of the couch. Harris Glenn looked annoyed to be missing a meeting. Nelson Dreer sipped bottled water like it was poison. Carmen Bell held her silence like it was her last inheritance. Marla Kemp stood near the window, not speaking but taking everything in. Wolfe remained seated, of course, a mountain in his yellow silk robe. I stood nearby, not blocking but ready. "I have summoned you," Wolfe began, "because one of you may be responsible for the attempted murder of Garrett Latham." The silence was immediate and profound. "That's absurd," Drower snapped. "No, it is inconvenient." Wolfe's voice didn't rise, but the room seemed to contract around it. "Mr. Latham was poisoned, slowly, deliberately by aconitine, introduced into his food. We have reason to believe the source was a jar of mayonnaise labeled Latham No. 2, Basil, which was sent to me anonymously after his disappearance." Glances flicked around the room like static electricity. Wolfe continued, "The substance, once ingested, produces symptoms easily mistaken for stress. It kills without spectacle, efficient, insidious, personal." Harris Glenn scoffed. "And you think one of us did that? For what, a marketing draft? No, not for a campaign. For silence." Wolfe turned to Drower. "Your company has faced allegations of mislabeling in the past. Quiet ones, buried. Mr. Latham once pursued such a story, under a pseudonym." Drower blanched. "That was resolved years ago. No wrongdoing found." Because the primary witness recanted, Wolfe said. Mr. Latham may have learned why. He may have embedded it coded in his so-called manuscript. Lila Stern whispered, That's why he called it a confession. Wolfe nodded. Yes, the marketing was misdirection, the story was personal, and the intended audience was here. He let the silence return. Then gently, Miss Bell. All eyes turned. You have not spoken. Yet Garrett Latham's notes suggest the poison was administered not all at once, but in multiple small doses. You are responsible for testing new jar seals, correct? Carmen blinked. Once, I handled packaging, yes. Did Mr. Latham request access to experimental jars? She hesitated. He asked for some samples, wanted the aesthetic to match. The authenticity, he said. Did anyone else handle those jars? Pause. Nelson, she said. He oversees compliance. He approved the contents. All heads swiveled to Nelson Dreer. He laughed. Short. Hard. Wait. You think I poisoned him? Why, because I handle labels? No, Wolfe said, because you handle what gets buried. Your division filed the original internal report on the labeling discrepancy 5 years ago, and it was your name on the retraction sent to the Food Safety Board. Dreer's face went still. Wolfe pressed. Did Mr. Latham find the report? Did. He threatened to expose it. Yes or no, a beat. Then, yes. Lila gasped. Wolfe continued, calm and lethal. He gave you a chance to come clean. Instead, you gave him something he'd trust, something familiar. And you altered it. Slowly. Dreer stood, hands trembling. He was going to ruin the company. Because you had already done the ruining, Wolfe said. He merely wanted the story told. Dreer made for the door, but I stepped in. He stopped. Wolfe exhaled. Mr. Drower, I suggest you call your legal counsel. Mr. Dreer attempted to silence a man with truth in his mouth. I led Dreer to the chair and picked up the phone. As I dialed, Wolfe leaned back. He believed taste could be memory. Now the law will remember him. Later, after everyone left, some shaken, some quiet, one in cuffs, Wolfe finally stood and walked to the globe to pour a brandy. He turned mayonnaise into a message, I said. Never thought I'd see the day. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. It was not the mayonnaise, it was the motive. He sipped once, then settled into his chair again. Dinner was roasted duck, crisped skin and all, and as Fritz served, Wolfe murmured, almost to himself, we may be civilized, but our poisons are old. I didn't argue. Some truths don't need salt. It wasn't over. I could tell because Wolfe didn't lean back with that look of satisfied inertia he gets when a case is filed, boxed, and mentally buried next to a bottle of Riesling and a Latin proverb. Instead, he kept his fingertips steepled, his gaze fixed on the manuscript Lionel Pritchard brought, still laid open across his desk like a body awaiting last rites. I let him brood while I filed my notes, listening for the sound of the world returning. To normal. It didn't. The brownstone, usually a bunker of calm after a resolution, still held an odd charge, like someone had left a window cracked and let a storm slip in unnoticed. You're not convinced, I said finally. No. He tapped one, finger against the page, not quite touching the words. Dreer attempted to poison Latham. That much is evident, but I do not believe he succeeded. Doc said Latham could have survived the doses if they stopped before accumulation turned fatal. Indeed. And if the last dose was never administered? I leaned against the cabinet. Then Garrett Latham's disappearance isn't explained by Dreer's actions alone. Wolfe nodded, eyes narrowing. Precisely. But Dreer confessed. He confessed to attempted murder and concealment, but not to murder. That was Wolfe, all right. Unable to leave a rug alone if the pattern wasn't symmetrical. I sighed and flipped open my notepad. All right. Then who finished the job? He didn't answer, but he did finally shift in his chair. Garrett Latham. knew something more than we have uncovered. He wrote a manuscript, yes, but he also created what he called a trail. Notes, recipes, allusions, breadcrumbs. That language was intentional, and we found most of those breadcrumbs. No. His eyes flicked toward the edge of the desk. We found the ones we were meant to find. I believe there is one more. I was about to ask how he knew when the doorbell rang. I got there fast and found Marla Kemp on the stoop holding a small black notebook. "Archie," she said, her voice tight. "I found this wedged in the bottom drawer of Garrett's office desk. I don't know how I missed it before. I was cleaning out the last of his things for legal. I brought her inside, took the notebook, and handed it straight to Wolfe, who opened it with delicate fingers. It wasn't much to look at. Handwritten pages, no headings, barely legible in places. But Wolfe read faster than I ever could. His eyes darted across the pages in small, precise increments. When he reached the fourth page, he stopped. Then he read it again. Then a third time, slowly. "What is it?" I asked. He tilted the book so I could read over his shoulder. Garrett's handwriting curved across the page in uneven strokes. "If anything happens to me, don't believe the first story you're told. Dreer isn't the only one. The real story was never about labels or food. It was about the woman who wrote the numbers, the woman who disappeared." I looked at Wolfe. "Who's the woman?" He closed the notebook. "That," he said, "is what we must now determine." Marla sat forward. "Garrett told me once he was inspired by someone he met years ago. A former employee, quiet, good with data. She uncovered something but didn't speak up. Left the company after that." "Did he give a name?" Wolfe asked. "No, but I remember him saying she worked under Carmen Bell." Wolfe's lips tightened, and Miss Bell said very little during our confrontation. Too little. I stood. "Want me to pay her a visit?" "No. Invite her here." "But if she's guilty, invite her," Wolfe repeated. Carmen arrived an hour later. She looked like someone who had accepted she'd be living under scrutiny for the rest of her life, but hadn't quite given up on wearing nice shoes. "Mr. Wolfe," she said quietly, folding her hands in her lap. "You wanted to see me?" I did. "Miss Bell, we have been made aware of a former employee, a woman who worked in your department. Quiet. Gifted. She discovered something and vanished." Carmen stiffened. "I don't know where she is," she said. "That was not the question," Wolfe replied. Silence stretched. Finally she spoke. "Her name was Elise Halperin. She handled archival compliance. Smart. Careful. She flagged something. Irregular 5 years ago. Shipment documents and product specs that didn't match. And, she told me, I told Dreer. He told her to drop it. She left the company 2 weeks later. No notice. I tried to reach her afterward. She never responded." Wolfe nodded once. "And Mr. Latham?" "I don't know how he found out. But he was obsessed. He said Elise had the truth. That if he could find her, he could finish the manuscript the way it deserved." Wolfe turned to me. "Archie." "Already on it," I said. By nightfall I had 3 leads. Elise Halperin had moved upstate, changed jobs twice, and dropped off. Every radar except the alumni newsletter of her undergrad program in Vermont. I called a number from a gardening forum she'd posted in 3 months back, claiming she was seeking organic soil for heirloom tomatoes. She answered on the second. "Ring, yes? Miss Halperin, my name's Archie Goodwin. I'm calling on behalf of Nero Wolfe. We're investigating the disappearance of a man you may have known. Garrett Latham." Long pause. "I don't know anyone by that name." "Maybe not. But he knew of you, and he tried to tell your story." Another pause, then she said quietly, "Come alone." The next day I took a train to a town that smelled like cedar, tractor oil, and generational regret. Elise Halperin lived in a converted barn with potted herbs on the porch and a tabby cat that looked like it paid rent. She opened the door herself. Late 40s, sharp eyes. Still. You really work for Nero Wolfe? Yes, ma'am. She poured coffee without asking, handed me a mug and sat down across from me on a chair that looked like it came with the house. I warned Garrett not to chase it, she said. I told him what happened to me. Dreer wasn't the only one. It wasn't just about mislabeling. There was an entire shipment they buried. Product contaminated at the plant. They paid off the report and shut it down. One person got sick, maybe more. But there was no lawsuit, no noise. The silence was bought. And you were the one who found it. Yes, and I left. I was young. I thought being quiet was safer. But Garrett couldn't let it go. No. He said it wasn't about exposure. It was about redemption. That he had done things too. Looked away once earlier in his career. This was his way of atoning. And you think someone silenced him? Her jaw tightened. If he's gone, yes. Would you talk to Wolfe? She looked away for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Back at the brownstone that night, Wolfe read Elise's signed statement, detailing the incident, the cover-up, and the payment trail. Combined with Latham's notes and Pritch's testimony, it gave us something new, corroboration. It also gave Wolfe the leverage he wanted. He wrote a single letter. No flourish, no threats, just facts. It went to the legal office of Drower Foods, marked confidential. By the end of the week, a second arrest warrant had been issued. Not for Dreer, but for the firm's internal counsel, whose signature appeared on Elise's severance settlement. Dreer, it turned out, had only administered the poison. Someone else had sealed the silence. That evening, Wolfe didn't gloat. He ate slowly, spoke less, and finally said, "Guilt, Mr. Goodwin, is not always loud. Sometimes it lives in the mayonnaise," I smiled, "and sometimes it leaves a paper trail." He nodded. For the fortunate or the determined, the brownstone was quiet again. But this time it was the kind of quiet earned only after the truth stops whispering and starts breathing. The morning after Elise Halperin's statement made its discreet way to the proper authorities, and by discreet, I mean Wolfe sent Saul Panzer downtown in a raincoat, with the kind of envelope that gets opened in quiet offices behind locked doors. The brownstone settled back into what passes for peace around here. Wolfe stayed in his chair longer than usual, which is saying something, and didn't reach for his orchid journal until nearly noon. I figured that meant he was either satisfied or still thinking. With Wolfe, those two states are sometimes indistinguishable. I let him simmer while I worked on drafting a polished case log in case the district attorney came calling. Fritz, in an apparent moment of thematic mischief, served chicken salad for lunch. Wolfe picked at it like it had personally offended him, then pushed the plate aside and asked me the sort of question that tells you he's not quite done playing. "Do you believe Mr. Latham expected to die?" That caught me mid-chew. I set my fork down. "You mean, did he know it wasn't just slow poisoning, that it was going to end him, period?" "Yes. I think he was prepared for it, if that's what you mean. He was the kind of guy who believed in big, dramatic closures. Maybe he didn't want to die, but he definitely wanted his message to outlive him." Wolfe nodded once. "And he entrusted the message not to a lawyer or a friend, but to strangers." Her brand strategist, a former editor, a detective he had never met. I shrugged. He was a writer. Drama was his religion. Wolfe let that hang there. Then he said, "Someone is still missing." "You mean Dreer's accomplice?" "No. I mean the final reader, the intended recipient of the confession." "You think it wasn't us?" He raised an eyebrow. "No offense, Mr. Goodwin. None taken." He tapped the manuscript gently with a fingertip. "Latham didn't just write this to expose a company or to punish a man. He was trying to reach someone specific. And I suspect that person has already read the whole thing." That gave me pause. "Pritch?" "No, he received only the prologue, a fragment, and he said so." "Elise?" "She provided context, not closure." "No. The person I'm thinking of has not come forward, and has no intention of doing so." I sat forward. "Then what do we do?" Wolfe smiled faintly. We sent an invitation. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Wolfe had dictated 3 concise letters, identical save for the names at the top: Len Drower, Marla Kemp, and Lila Stern. Each was told the same thing. Mr. Wolfe had acquired new information. He would be hosting a final gathering to discuss Garrett Latham's manuscript. Attendance was not mandatory, but would be considered revealing. We mailed the letters by hand and waited. Wolfe, of course, didn't pace. He simply sat, but his mind, I could tell, was moving faster than usual. That night he read nothing. He made no comments about Fritz's fennel compote. He just stared at Latham's manuscript, then at the black notebook Elise had given us, and finally at the single piece of paper that had arrived by courier that morning, unsigned, unmarked, and typed in the same font as Latham's prior notes. You found the crime, but not the confession. No return address, no fingerprints. I don't like ghosts, I said. It's not a ghost, Wolfe said. It's a survivor. 2 days later, all 3 guests arrived, staggered but punctual. Marla Kemp came first, her hair tied back, dressed for restraint. Then Lila Stern, who looked tired but polished. Finally, Len Drower, his expression unreadable behind his tortoise shell. Glasses and faint cologne that didn't quite mask tension. Wolfe didn't waste time. I appreciate your presence, he said once they were seated. Garrett Latham's manuscript is now with the authorities. Those responsible for his poisoning, Mr. Dreer and his legal enabler, will face judgment. However, there remains one piece unplaced. One person who has read the full manuscript, the real version, and said nothing. Drower frowned. You think one of us? Yes, Wolfe said. Because Latham was a writer. He was also meticulous. He would not have relied on chance to complete his message. He left the final piece with someone he trusted to understand it, and to bury it if necessary. Lila blinked. That could be anyone. No, Wolfe said. It had to be someone who would be in the center of the aftermath. Someone close enough to both Dreer and the fallout to decide what justice meant, and someone clever enough to control a narrative. His gaze slid to Marla Kemp. She didn't flinch. She just let out a long breath. I didn't poison him. No, Wolfe said. You protected him, and when he died you chose silence. You read the manuscript before it was taken. He gave it to you. You copied it. Then you let the world believe it was missing. Marla looked down at her hands. He asked me to read it, all of it. He said he needed to know if it was ready. I told him it was brilliant and dangerous. He said that was the point. And when he disappeared? I asked. I thought he had gone to the police. Or the press. But then Dreer came into my office 2 days later, asking if I'd seen the manuscript. That's when I knew. You said nothing. I needed proof. And I didn't want to die next. Wolfe spoke gently now. You sent us the jar. She nodded. The notes? Only some. The rest I kept in case no one else took it seriously. And this? Wolfe held up the final anonymous page. She hesitated. No, that wasn't me. Wolfe nodded. That, I suspect, came from someone else who read the full confession, someone who found the copy you made, and who decided to let the story finish on its own terms. Drower looked up sharply. You're saying there's another copy out there? Wolfe turned to him. There is a reason your legal team didn't. Shred all the records. Someone wanted the truth to surface, but not too soon. They wanted guilt to fester. And it has. He leaned back, concluding, I have no interest in corporate cleansing. My duty is to the dead and to the truth. Garrett Latham's final request was to be heard. He has been. Drower shifted uncomfortably. Lila sat very still. Marla closed her eyes and said softly, He would have liked this ending. After they left, I poured Wolfe a brandy. He accepted it with a grunt and stared into it like it held the next mystery. So, I said, The manuscript gets published. No. Why not? Because the truth, once found, must be handled with care. Mr. Latham wrote a confession. He did not seek revenge. Miss Kemp ensured it would not be misused. Still feels unfinished, I said. It is, Wolfe replied. Justice always is. He raised the brandy, and for once didn't offer a quotation or a scold, just a silence filled with meaning. And in that silence I thought of Latham, of jars and pages, of hidden names and bitter tastes, of a writer who had turned memory into mayonnaise and left behind a truth too dangerous to be digested whole. Outside, New York carried on. But in the brownstone, peace had returned. Fragile, imperfect, but honest. Wolfe, as always, had found the final flavor. The days that followed were quiet, but not the kind of quiet Wolfe enjoyed. This was the silence that comes when something's been dug up but not yet buried. The press got hold of the arrest, of course. Dreer's name hit the business columns like an unripe olive, bitter, hard to swallow, and with an aftertaste that wouldn't go away. Drower Foods issued a statement full of integrity and regret, which is code for, please don't stop buying. How are pickles? Wolfe read it without comment. He read everything without comment, which was worse. Then came the call from Saul. She's gone, he said. Marla Kemp. Packed up. No forwarding. Left her badge on her desk. She say anything? Only that her job was finished, I told Wolfe. He nodded. Just once. That is as it should be. And then he went back to pruning a tiny orchid whose name I didn't ask because I value my life. But my instincts weren't settled. Neither was the manuscript. We'd returned Latham's pages to the authorities, including the copy Marla had admitted to keeping, but something still felt missing, something Wolfe hadn't quite named yet, which meant it was still prowling, the corners of his mind like a cat, waiting for a mouse to get careless. 2 mornings later I found the final piece. It arrived in the mail. No stamp, no sender. Just a slim manila envelope tucked between our usual stack of advertisements and subscription. Renewals, inside, a single page. Typed, he died at peace. He knew it would end him. He made the choice. You gave him what he wanted. No signature, no initials. Just that. Wolfe read it 3 times. Then he sat back and closed his eyes. You see, he said quietly. That is the confession. I raised an eyebrow. You think Latham sent it? No, he entrusted it. Likely to Miss Kemp, perhaps to someone else. But this is the final paragraph. The one he didn't write in the manuscript because he believed it could only be delivered if someone understood his choice. I sat. For once I didn't have a wisecrack ready. He really knew. Yes. Wolfe opened his eyes. He knew he was being poisoned, and he chose not to run, not to retaliate, but to make meaning of it. That is a rare man. The stupid one, maybe. Perhaps. He leaned back and folded his hands. But stupidity in service of clarity has been called courage before. That was the closest Wolfe would get to admiration. I thought of Garrett Latham, his manuscript, his slow death, his quiet desperation to leave behind more than just a story about emulsified eggs. He wanted justice, yes, but more than that he wanted to be understood. Saul returned that evening with an update. The investigation was moving ahead. Elise Halperin had been granted whistleblower protections. Lionel Pritch's testimony had been taken. Carmen Bell had submitted her resignation. Drower Foods would survive, but with new oversight and a lingering scar, they'd spend the next decade covering with limited edition mustard, and still, Wolfe didn't celebrate. We were finishing dinner, veal medallions in rosemary cream, when he finally broke the silence that had wrapped around the case like cling film. Do you believe in moral absolutes, Archie? I paused. That's not usually how you start dessert conversation. He ignored me. I mean it. Do you believe there is a right answer to every question, or that some truths are too ambiguous to quantify. I thought about it. I think people like to pretend they believe in absolutes, but when push comes to shove, they pick what they can live with. Wolfe nodded slowly. Latham did not. No, I agreed. He chose to die to prove a point. Not quite. He chose to die so the point could not be buried again. I sipped my coffee and looked at him. You admired him. I respected him, Wolfe corrected. Admiration is wasteful, which from Wolfe is as good as a standing ovation. After dinner, I filed the final page in our locked cabinet, next to the official record and the case notes. Wolfe dictated an entry for his personal index. Latham Garrett, writer, created confessional marketing manuscript, victim of long-term attempted poisoning, aconitine. Motive, exposure of corporate. Malpractice, died voluntarily, left evidence embedded in symbolic narrative. Orchestrated justice via subtext and allies. Moral strategist, that was Wolfe's word. Strategist, not victim, not martyr, not whistleblower, strategist. The kind of person Wolfe understood. I locked the file and turned off the light. Outside, the city sounded normal again. Horns, wind, people with places to be. Inside, the brownstone was finally still. A week passed. Wolfe returned to his reading. Fritz returned to cooking things that didn't remind us of condiment crime scenes. I returned to dodging phone calls from tabloids who'd somehow gotten wind that Wolfe had cracked a mayonnaise mystery. One reporter even asked if we were planning a cookbook. Then late one evening, Wolfe surprised me. I am not fond of memorials, he said, sipping beer, but I believe Mr. Latham should not go unremembered. Short of publishing the manuscript, what do you suggest? Nothing public, Wolfe said, but something lasting. He handed me a small card. I read it. It was a recipe, handwritten by Wolfe himself. Mayonnaise with basil and truth. Latham variation. 1 egg yolk, 1 TSP lemon juice, 1 TSP white wine vinegar, 1 TSP Dijon mustard, pinch of salt, 3 per 4 cup neutral oil, 1 TSP fresh basil, finely chopped, stir in silence. Serve only with integrity. I looked up. You're serious? I have given it to Fritz, Wolfe said. He will prepare it once, then never again. I shook my head, grinning. You're a sentimental old cuss, Wolfe. Phooey, he muttered. But he didn't deny it. That night, over a simple cold chicken plate with Latham's variation on the side, we toasted the only way Wolfe knows how, with silence, observation, and an appetite for justice served cold. Or in this case, gently whisked. 3 days later, Wolfe refused to speak to anyone before 10 a.m., which normally wouldn't be newsworthy in the slightest. But this time, it wasn't because he was meditating over the rare Ecuadorian orchid that had bloomed on schedule, or because he'd read something infuriating in the Gazette. It was because someone had sent him a jar. Yes, again. It arrived at 8:41 sharp. An anonymous courier, no name, no signature. Just a package left at the stoop, neatly wrapped in brown paper, twine knotted with the kind of precision that tells you someone took their time. Fritz found it and brought it in with a raised eyebrow and a grumble about culinary desecration. This time it wasn't mayonnaise, it was aioli. Hand-labeled Garrett No. 3 Tarragon. The writing matched the previous jar, but this one hadn't been opened. Wolfe, upon seeing it, didn't say a word. He stared at the jar like it was an insect crawling across his globe, then ordered Fritz to send it out for testing immediately. There is nothing casual about this, he said. You think it's a threat? No, he replied. It's a statement. But Latham is dead. Yes, Wolfe said, but his manuscript wasn't the only message. I waited, because when Wolfe speaks in fragments like that, you don't interrupt. You let the gears grind. Someone preserve this, he said finally. Someone who believes his legacy isn't complete. Mahler, no, Wolfe said. She has withdrawn, intentionally and discreetly. Then who? Wolfe's gaze drifted to the window. I do not yet know. But the arrival of this third jar confirms that someone else is playing custodian, perhaps even curator. Mr. Latham had more than one reader. That was enough to send me back to my phone. I called Saul, who was already 5 steps into his own. Morning. I told him what we'd received. He grunted once and said he'd get moving. Within 4 hours he had something. Courier service matches the last delivery, Saul reported. Cash drop. Pick up from a coffee shop in Soho. Security footage caught a figure. Hood up, dark clothes, gloves, nothing obvious. But the package was handed off by someone else. Someone else? Tall, female, late 50s maybe. Big. Sunglasses, red scarf, looked like a disguise. She didn't linger. Could it have been Elise? Could be. Or someone working with her. You want me to pay a visit? No, I said. Let's wait. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe wasn't. Waiting. He had me retrieve every word of Latham's original manuscript and every annotation Wolfe had made since. He had marked certain phrases, the third course when the herb of forgiveness, and it is not enough to accuse, one must season the truth. He was circling something. Garrett's language was more than metaphor, Wolfe said. It was his shield. He buried real information inside his food references like the aioli. Hidden messages? Possibly, Wolfe murmured. Or perhaps just layers. Each jar a chapter. Mayonnaise was memory, basil, bitterness, and now tarragon. What does tarragon suggest to you? I think of French cooking, I said. Béarnaise sauce, poultry, slightly bittersweet. Exactly, a bridge, Wolfe said. A flavor that balances, that suggests closure. That word hung in the room. He called Fritz in and requested a dish with tarragon. Fritz gave him a look that said, I know what you're doing, and it's insane, but complied. Over a lunch of roasted chicken and tarragon cream sauce, Wolfe made his decision. Archie, find Elise Halperin. Again, she's not going to want to come back. No, but she will. This time she has something to finish. It took 2 days. Saul tracked her to a seasonal rental on the North Fork of Long Island, near a greenhouse that sold heirloom citrus. I drove out there under a cloudy sky and a rental car's doubtful suspension. Elise opened the door wearing gloves and a smudge of potting soil on her cheek. She didn't look surprised. I told myself I wouldn't get involved again, she said. And yet here you are. I held up a photo of the jar. Know this? She took one look and nodded. That was his favorite. He called it the apology flavor. For what? For staying silent too long. I followed her inside, where the kitchen was stacked with old notebooks, dried herbs, and one small file box labeled simply GL. She poured tea and waited. I helped him, she said finally. Near the end, Garrett asked me to hold on to a few things. He knew Dreer was watching him. He knew it might end badly. You sent the jar? No, I gave them to someone else. Who? She hesitated. I can't tell you, she said. Not because I don't trust you, but because they never told me their real name, only that they'd worked with Garrett before, on something sensitive. I leaned in. You're saying there's a third party? Yes. Someone in the system. Not at Drower Foods, somewhere else. Government? Possibly, or media, I don't know. What were they supposed to do? Finish the job, she said. Not the exposure, the explanation. Garrett didn't want to destroy people. He wanted them to understand why silence is deadly. I sat back. Wolfe thinks someone's still acting on his behalf. Elise looked at me. Good. Can you send us what you have, the rest of the notes? She nodded. Yes, I think it's time. Back in the brownstone, Wolfe spent 3 hours reading the new material. Elise's box contained scraps, handwritten. Pages, lines Latham had rejected or rewritten. One page in particular stood out. It had been labeled with only one word, penultimate. It read, "If this is read, know that I failed in person, but succeeded in trust. This is not revenge. This is a flavor meant to stay on the tongue. To remind, to change. No one is the villain, only the silence is." Wolfe closed the folder and sat very still. "This is not about crime," he said finally. "It's about legacy. So what do we do?" He looked at me. We let it simmer. That meant we didn't chase, we didn't dig. We waited. It took one more week. The final piece came as a URL typed on a card, hand-delivered by a cab driver who said, "Lady with a scarf gave me this," then left. Wolfe typed it in, a private website, unlisted, just one page, Garrett Latham's. Full manuscript annotated, footnoted, framed not as a confession but as a lesson with commentary, a short forward unsigned. "This is not evidence. This is education. Let those who consume it learn what it cost to say nothing." I turned to Wolfe. He said nothing for a long time. Then, "That, Mr. Goodwin, is the tarragon. The bridge. Yes, between exposure and understanding." He closed the laptop. "Will you report it?" I asked. "No. It will be found when it must be. We have done enough." I stood. Wolfe reached for his beer, and so ended the manuscript its jars sent. Its message revealed. Not just a mystery solved, but a story told and finally fully tasted. The following Monday, I found Nero Wolfe in the plant rooms at an hour he normally reserved for digestive contemplation and ignoring the telephone. He wasn't tending orchids, though. He was simply standing among them, hands clasped behind his back, staring at a white cattleya that had bloomed overnight. He didn't say anything when I stepped in, so I waited. Wolfe never rushes language. "Not when it matters, Archie," he said eventually without turning. "What does it mean to you that Mr. Latham's manuscript was not published traditionally, nor presented in court, but instead released anonymously, silently?" "I'd say it means the person behind the leak wasn't interested in spectacle." "No," Wolfe said. "It means they trusted the story more than the system." He turned now, slowly, and walked past the dendrobiums with the deliberation of a man rearranging thoughts more than footsteps. "I have been rereading the annotations," he continued. "The additions made by the unknown party before the manuscript was posted. They are meticulous. Gentle, even. They soften the harshness of Latham's prose. They suggest empathy." "You think it was edited?" "I think it was tended to." I followed him back to the office, where Fritz had already placed the morning's coffee and a delicate bowl of poached eggs with watercress on the tray. Wolfe ignored it for the moment, which is how I knew the next part would be significant. "Elise was not the final custodian," Wolfe said, settling into his chair. "She preserved, yes, but the shaping hand, whoever posted the manuscript, did so with care, with reverence. That was someone who understood not just Latham's words but his wounds. And you don't think it was Marla Kemp? No. Miss Kemp respected Latham, but she did not share him. She withheld, protected. She is not our steward." "Then, who?" Wolfe sighed. "That, Archie, is the final curiosity, and in our world a curiosity is never allowed to remain unattended." I went back to the manuscript. The posted version hadn't gone viral, not yet. It was on a hidden domain with no backlinks and no mention on social media. But someone had emailed it to 6 university professors, 2 food ethics bloggers, and a non-profit that lobbied for better food labeling regulations, which meant it was about to start traveling. I reached out to one of the professors, a woman at Columbia, who taught a course called Narrative and Ethics in Modern Advertising. She confirmed she'd received the manuscript but hadn't yet read it. "Anonymous," she said, "but the formatting is very specific. It reads like something designed for slow digestion." That echoed Wolfe's phrase, "tended to." The annotations were sparse, restrained, just clarifying notes, observations, never judgments. Wolfe was right. This wasn't some angry whistleblower's blog dump. This was a legacy being curated. So I started chasing traces, metadata, server locations, upload logs, and I got lucky. The domain had been registered through a privacy service, but the last edit to the manuscript had been made on a laptop using a VPN that routed through a very specific library in Connecticut. I passed the info to Saul. By the next day, he had a name, Lenore Hall, retired editor, former colleague of Garrett Latham, back when he was still dabbling in fiction. She lived in a quiet house near New Haven and was known for tutoring undergrads in creative writing. She hadn't spoken to a journalist in 15 years. I paid her a visit. She answered the door with the kind of expression you earn after half a century of seeing people come and go. "You're here about Garrett." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She let me in, poured tea, and didn't ask questions. She simply waited. "You edited the manuscript?" "No," she said. "He did that himself. I only added the margins. I clarified where he was too poetic for the point to land. I softened his rage." "Why?" "Because he asked me to. Years ago, when we worked together, he told me that if he ever wrote his truth, he'd need someone to make sure it didn't bleed on the reader. And he sent you a copy 3 weeks before he disappeared, with a note, 'If anything happens to me, you know what to do.'" She looked at me then, eyes sharp despite her age. He didn't want it buried in litigation. He didn't trust corporate morality. He wanted to tell the truth, but, in a way, people would listen to. "So you waited." "I waited for confirmation. When I saw the arrests, I knew the world was ready. I sat back and let that settle." "You didn't want credit?" "Garrett would have hated that." I asked for a copy of the original unedited file. She handed it over in a plain USB drive. "I have no stake in this," she said. "Only stewardship. Make sure it doesn't get used for spectacle," I promised. Back at the brownstone, I gave the drive to Wolfe. He inserted it into his private machine, scanned the contents, and read in silence. Then he said, "She was right." "Do you trust her version?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "She removed nothing vital. She merely ensured it would land with the necessary grace." "Will it stay anonymous?" "I believe so. Miss Hall has no appetite for attention." "So what happens now?" He closed the laptop. "Nothing," Wolfe said. "The story has been told. The truth is in motion. All that remains is to let the world discover it, or ignore it. Do you think it'll make a difference?" Wolfe lifted his coffee and sipped. "No," he said. "But it might make someone think. And in the end, that is more than most confessions achieve." That night we dined simply. Buttered asparagus, cold salmon, a very subtle lemon cream sauce. Fritz had found a balance in the acidity that made Wolfe grunt with approval, his version of praise. We didn't speak of Latham, or Dreer, or the slow, bitter way the truth had climbed its way out of a sealed jar. Instead, Wolfe looked out the window and muttered something about parsley needing less sun, and I sat back in my chair and let the quiet fill the room. Not the kind of quiet that comes after a meal. The kind that comes after a storm, when the truth has already been spoken, and all you can do is taste what remains. The final act in a Nero Wolfe case doesn't come with a curtain or a bow. It comes with the reappearance of normal life. The orchids bloom, the eggs arrive precisely soft in the middle, and Wolfe returns to Pliny and Horace and dismissing anything he did the week before as an inconvenient deviation from the ordered life. But even by Wolfe's standards, his return to routine after the Latham matter was resolute. He resumed his regular orchid schedule, reclaimed his 4 daily bottle caps of beer, and requested that all traces of mayonnaise, philosophical, culinary, or metaphorical, be excised from Fritz's pantry. "I do not wish to be haunted by condiments," he muttered, and yet in his own Wolfian way, he was haunted. Not by guilt or failure, he'd won, and he knew it, but by a case that left a residue, the kind you don't scrub off with logic or good bourbon. Latham's manuscript had revealed the truth, yes, but it had also exposed something Wolfe rarely allowed to the surface, the possibility that justice might, at its most honest, come not from law or even intellect, but from quiet endurance. That morning, Wolfe asked me to retrieve a book from the attic, a slim volume, bound in faded blue linen with no title on the spine. When I brought it down, he handled it carefully and opened to a page marked by a yellowed envelope. He read for several minutes before speaking. Mr. Latham's tragedy, he said, was not that he died. It was that he had to convince the world he mattered before it would listen. That's most people, Wolfe. Most people don't leave jars behind. I didn't push further. When Wolfe begins making philosophical sauces out of his deductions, you let him stir. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Inspector Kramer. "What the hell?" he barked. "You people still aren't done with that food writer?" Technically, he was a marketing consultant. Yeah? Well, now he's a martyr. Someone's leaked that manuscript to every reporter in town. My phone's melting. The DA wants to know if you or Wolfe authorized the release. We didn't, I said truthfully. But we knew it was coming. You sitting on something? No. I said, just watching it rise. That earned a moment of silence, then, I heard the match strike, the line went quiet again. I waited. Then, I didn't like the guy. Too clever. Too much theater. Sound familiar? Yeah, Kramer said. Which is probably why I'm calling you instead of storming in. We hung up. I passed the update to Wolfe. He didn't react except to lift one eyebrow and say, he's learning. That night, news broke. An article in the Times, unsigned, but clearly guided by the leaked manuscript, outlined the Drower case, the internal corruption, and Latham's part in exposing it. No names were printed beyond those already arrested or resigned, no direct accusations, but the story moved with calm, quiet gravity and ended with a quote from the manuscript itself. The truth does not need a trumpet. It needs a tongue. Wolfe cut it out and folded it neatly. The next morning, Fritz served eggs en cocotte with a touch of tarragon, just enough to remind Wolfe without daring to annoy him. "Fritz," Wolfe said gently, "you are an irrepressible romantic. Only." "In seasoning, sir." Fritz retreated with his usual grace, and Wolfe resumed sipping beer, letting the day settle into place like a properly weighted napkin. I sat with the latest case log open in front of me, giving it the once-over before filing. Wolfe gestured, for it skimmed the ending and grunted once in approval. "You left out the literary detours. You always tell me not to editorialize." "Yes, but in this instance, it would not have been embellishment. It would have been texture." I tilted my head. "You want more flavor?" he sighed. "Pfui." But he didn't hand the pages back. Later, Saul Panzer dropped by, uninvited, which meant something was on his mind. He handed Wolfe an envelope and said, "From Elise Halperin. She didn't want to send it through me, but she also didn't want to mail it. She thought you'd understand." Wolfe opened it with unusual care. Inside, a single page, handwritten. "Some truths ferment, others clarify. Garrett gave us both. Thank you for tasting what others discarded." No signature, no initials. Wolfe read it twice. Then he laid it down, and did something I hadn't seen in years. He smiled, not a smirk, not a twitch of satisfaction, a full smile. "There," he said, "that will do." A week later, everything felt complete. The press had shifted attention to a celebrity chef scandal involving foie gras and an endangered bird. The Drower Board had named an interim ethics officer. Carmen Bell had published a column in a Quiet Food magazine anonymously about accountability as a flavor, and the mysterious website that hosted Latham's manuscript now featured a single update, added quietly at the bottom, "This is the last jar." Wolfe didn't discuss it further, but on a rainy Thursday evening, while we were playing chess and He was chewing on a mild cheddar cube. He looked up at me over the board and said, "Mr. Goodwin, do you recall the first case we took that involved food?" "Which one? The truffle theft? The poisoned pheasant? The garlic magnate who faked his death in Palermo?" "No," he said. "The boy with the bakery. The recipe left in a will." "Oh, that one." "Food is not merely sustenance," Wolfe said. "It is the most common form of remembrance. That is why this case will remain with me." He moved his rook with a clack. "Check," I grinned. "That's your philosophical closer?" "No," Wolfe said. "That's just good strategy." I moved my bishop. "Mate in 3, I said. He grunted. "Pfui." But he didn't disagree. We never spoke of the mayonnaise again. But Fritz, just once on a lazy Sunday when Wolfe was upstairs and the kitchen was quiet, placed a tiny jar on the counter next to me. It was unlabeled. "I thought you might want a keepsake," he said. "Don't open it." "I won't," I said. I never did. And that's how it ended, with silence, with a flavor, with a truth that didn't ask to be heard loudly, only to be tasted and never forgotten. A Nero Wolfe case, once resolved, doesn't end with a round of applause or a shot of whiskey. It ends with him picking up Horace again and pretending the rest of the world no longer requires his intervention. If he had his way, justice would arrive with as little noise as a leaf drifting into a pond, and with just as much inevitability. So with all suspects accounted for, and all jars catalogued or destroyed, Wolfe returned to his chair. That's where he was when the final visitor came to the brownstone. Not a suspect, not a client, not even a messenger. Just a woman with a calm face and a quiet question. She gave her name as Lenore Hall. Wolfe, of course, already knew. He said without rising, "You were the final custodian." She nodded. "I was his editor." Wolfe gestured to the red leather chair. She didn't hesitate. "I didn't come for praise," she said, "only to make sure you understood." "I do," Wolfe said, "but I prefer to confirm." "You've already done that." She smiled, not coyly, but with the weary satisfaction of someone who's carried a story too long and finally found its place. I added the annotations. I chose the phrasing. I sent it quietly. I told no one. Garrett asked me to wait for a signal. The arrests were the signal. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You shaped the legacy." "I honored it," she said. "He didn't want a war, he wanted a record." "I admire precision," Wolfe replied, "especially in memory." Lenore Hall stayed only 12 minutes. She left nothing behind but a faint trace of lavender and a sense of symmetry. When the door clicked shut, Wolfe said, "There, now it is finished." That night we had lamb with a rosemary crust and a turnip puree that Fritz insisted was culinarily redemptive. Wolfe allowed it, which is another way of saying it was flawless. We didn't talk about the case again until the plates were cleared and the beer was poured. Then, Wolfe said, "There is a concept in moral philosophy called silent virtue, the idea that the most meaningful acts are the ones that don't seek credit." "Garrett Latham Fitz?" "No," Wolfe said. "He sought acknowledgement, but those around him, Elise, Lenore, embodied it. They became the vessels. The flavor lingers because they carried it carefully." I was quiet a moment. "You think his manuscript made a difference? To whom? To anyone?" Wolfe took a long sip of beer. "That is not my concern. I care that it was complete and that it was accurate." "That's enough?" He nodded. "It is the only thing that ever is." A week passed. Then 2. The press forgot about Latham. The Drower food scandal was replaced by something flashier. A tech billionaire had insulted a pastry chef on live television. The city's memory, as always, was short and loud, but now and then a letter would arrive, handwritten, addressed to Wolfe, from readers who'd found the manuscript on their own. Quiet people, librarians, culinary students. One came from a retired food safety inspector in Maine. They all said the same thing. I didn't know I needed to read that until I did. Wolfe didn't answer them, of course. He read them, then filed them in a drawer marked simply, Latham. He never spoke of it, but he didn't throw a single one away. Then came a late afternoon in early spring. I was cleaning out the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, yes, voluntarily, when I found a plain white envelope I didn't recognize. No stamp, no date. Wolfe's handwriting on the front. Do not discard inside a single sheet, typed. You solved the mystery, but the truth is not what was hidden, it's what had to be told the long way. This is not about mayonnaise, it's about silence, and who gets to break it. No name. I showed Wolfe. He glanced at it and said, I know. You wrote it? No. Then who? He looked out the window, where the first red buds had started to nudge their way through the branches in the garden. It doesn't matter. And that's how it ends, with a confession not from a killer but from a keeper, with a story that didn't detonate but dissolved into thought and food and memory, with a man who died not in vain but in message. Garrett Latham may never become a household name. His manuscript may never win awards, but in one corner of West 35th Street his truth found a home. It was tasted, it was understood, and in Wolfe's world that's the closest thing to justice we ever get.